Been doing well, and I want to thank Taylor so much for our previous debates, and am certainly looking forward to this tonight. Let me draw a contrast to some of the things that Taylor has outlined. He is very open to talk about his atheism. I, as you'll see shortly, will be very open to talk about my theism and my belief in the Bible as a historical document. For those of you that have listened to previous debates, I've tried to come up with some new things as a way to introduce myself to the audience. Um, in my last 50 years of work as a professional geologist, I've been privileged to do geologic field work on every continent except three. We could play a game and guess which three, but I'll tell you. It turns out I've never been to Australia, I've never been to Antarctica, and I've never been to Greenland. But all the other continents I have done geologic field work on. And so when I argue tonight about a young Earth, it's with that background. Donnie, may I start with Taylor with our lighthearted George kind of joke at the beginning? Can we do that?
A joke in our introductions is more than okay, David. Go ahead, brother.
Well, I wanted Snake to know that I've got a big heart, and that if I'm not careful tonight, he may actually break my heart in half like this. But I hope that that doesn't happen, because the heart, a topic for another debate, is a remarkable evidence of intelligent design. But that's what will pass as my joke tonight, Taylor, for you. Good to see you, my friend.
Back at you.
Well, there might be a couple broken hearts during this evening's debate, because you both always bring the heat, extra aggressive. No, but seriously, always professional, always civil, and always easy to moderate debates with Taylor and David. Again, two prominent debaters in the debate world, both seasoned, both have had many debates on many topics, including this one. Again, reminder to the audience, anybody who's just joining us, we are debating specifically the topic, young Earth creation on trial. And so I'm pumped for this. I know the audience is as well. If you want to see more from the debaters, again, to the debaters, I appreciate the intros. Check the description box for the relevant links, and you can check out their channels and see more from them. Professor McQueen specifically, you'll find a link to this channel where he's done his content. So let me go over the format for tonight. We will be it'll be a formal debate with David in the affirmative. He'll be starting with his opening statement. We're going to have 12 minutes for opening statements, followed by uninterrupted rebuttals of 8 minutes. Then we're going to have a roughly 5 or 10 minute break where I will go over reminders, announcements. The debaters themselves, our guests tonight, can take a little break, get a drink of water, fill up their coffee, whatever they want to do. Then we'll jump right into a 40-minute very good, David. A 40-minute open discussion. This is going to be a little more free-flowing rather than a strict cross exam where they can take turns asking each other questions related to tonight's debate topic. Then we'll have a 5-minute closing statement where David and Taylor can wrap up their thoughts and points. And then this is where we get you guys in the audience involved. We'll have a roughly 25-minute audience Q&A period. So please, if you do have a question for our guests, whether it's David or Taylor, let me know who the question is for and try and tag me either at Donnie or at Standing for Truth. And that
Taylor,
way
Taylor, did you notice that Donnie did not get the email about the plaid shirt? We're the only two that's got a plaid shirt on.
Exactly. Yeah. We're going plaid blue.
I feel left out. I got to get a plaid SF t-shirt to match you gentlemen. Okay, so with that, I'm pumped. I think this is going to be a great debate. David McQueen, we are going to hand it over to you. And whenever you are ready, you've got 12 minutes.
I've got my secret clock set, and I'll be ready to end in 12 minutes.
Perfect.
Here is the outline of what we're going to be going over tonight in regard to evidences that the earth is young. Now, notice that my basic argument is stated here that the earth is actually around 6,000 years old. And I want to demonstrate, as the debate goes on, both by history and also by science, that this is the best model to explain the details of the Earth's magnetic field, the details of rocks and minerals, the details of how our Earth is put together. I gave a lot of thought and prayer as a theist, as someone who believes that the Bible is a trustworthy document that paints a picture throughout history of a creator that has been offended by man's sin. That creator then ends up dealing throughout all the Old Testament, building up to the time that we just celebrated, Easter, with the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and then carrying on through the rest of the Bible in a unified way. Now, the way that I want to begin this tonight is by first doing a rundown of the arguments that I'm going to present so that Taylor can think about what type of rebuttal he might want to give as the first hour goes on. But my basic argument will revolve around this, that when we look at the Bible, we actually are looking at a trustworthy document. I'm going to emphasize Genesis 5, chapter 5, which talks about not the genealogy from Adam all the way up to Abraham, but rather the chronology, actually up to Noah for tonight. And I'm going to suggest that the correct view of history is his story, the idea of his being the creator God and the Lord Jesus. My second argument for tonight is going to revolve around church history, which is a different twist on things than I've done in the past. Until around 1700 AD, some would argue until 200 years ago, so they put the break at 1800 AD. But my argument tonight is that in church history, the Bishop ushered date of 4004 BC, which I have loved to present to my evolutionary colleagues for at least 40 years as a defender of old Bishop Ussher. That date of 4004 BC was routinely accepted up until around 1700 AD. And when you look at the details of church history, and I can turn around here to look at this small part here on this side, most scientists that approach the issue of the age of the earth in 1500, 1600, 1700, all the way up even into 1800, before the time of Darwin in 1859, viewed a young earth as common knowledge. My next group of arguments make the transition from the Bible and church history to rivers. The red delta that I have there is the Greek symbol for a delta. And I'm going to present an argument that river deltas, when looked at, whether in the writings of creation scientists in the mid-1800s or modern works, river deltas end up presenting themselves as being around 4,000 to 5,000 years old. I'll be looking at a work done in the mid 1800s that gives the date of 4,500 years for the Mississippi River Delta. Knowing that Taylor and others critics were going to go online and try to look up what the modern vocabulary is for a Mississippi River, I went to a website that we'll put up at the end called the Coastal Wetland Planning Prediction, CWPPRA, 1990 data. And they say, well, sediment deposition in the Mississippi River Delta can be documented to 5,000 years. Now, our critics will call that the beginning of the last ice age, but isn't it interesting that that number comes up to 5,000? Then I'm going to switch over to the Nile Delta with some work that was published in the archaeological literature in 2019, which puts the date of the Nile Delta at 4,000 years BP. So I challenge you, Taylor, to explain why these numbers begin to come together. Now, what other arguments will follow underneath this? Well, one of the arguments that I'm going to bring up is the decay of the Earth's magnetic field. I think that Taylor and other critics actually have no argument at all about the decay of the Earth's magnetic field, indicating a date of the Earth less than 10,000 years old. As you will see, I make this assumption by dismissing the dynamo theory for the regeneration of the Earth's magnetic field. I will go to an old friend that Taylor's used to me talking about, and that is radioactive halos. But for the age of the Earth, I'm going to focus only on polonium halos. For those of you that may be joining us the first time, get your periodic table out. That's PO, not plutonium, but polonium halos. And then we're going to build on that as we have time in the question and answer times about the argument based on population statistics as to why the Earth would be young. And then I'll throw in my favorite area of research, which I was trained in at the University of Michigan, the area of metallic ore deposits, and my argument that the evidence from copper, lead, zinc, gold, silver can be best explained geologically by young Earth. Thank you for your attention, Donnie. I hope I hit 12 pretty close.
Absolutely. You used about 8 minutes and 40 seconds, David, so we can toss the remaining time into the open discussion. So with that, let me restart the timer and we'll hand it to Taylor whenever you're ready. You have up to 12 minutes as well. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you for that. And yeah, so I'm just going to set my own timer here. And of course it's freezing. Okay. So we have a problem with evidence here. So basically there's a ton of evidence for the scientific consensus among multiple fields, and you have to disagree with these dozens of different fields that all cross-confirm each other. There was mention of how come these numbers come together. Well, if we're going to use that as an argument, then we have to also look at the stronger number correlation for the age of the Earth, which is held by the consensus. So there's dozens of different fields. There's the ice cores, the trees, the radiometric dating, the geology, the sediment deposition rates. They varves, they all cross confirm each other. Even genetic clocks all cross confirm each other with the same basic age of the Earth, and that they're much stronger correlation of numbers. So we also saw a presentation of, well, none of the things that Professor McQueen presented here are preclusionary towards the scientific consensus of old Earth. There's probably not much need to go into, I guess, refute much that, because he didn't say much about evolution. But I think I'll touch a little bit on that because creationism is on trial, and creationism cannot explain anything really biologically, and it can't explain anything in the fossil record either. Meanwhile, the scientific consensus can predict things like the fossil record with actually pretty great specificity. You might say that creationism predicts that there would be, I don't know, sea life on the tops of mountains, something like that. But there's no specificity. They can't really, they didn't predict. We already know, so they can't predict at this point. But people at the time couldn't predict exactly what anatomy these organisms would have or why. But it's also not preclusionary. So the evidence fits. If we're just going to say there's sea life on top of mountains, the evidence is explainable either way. But there is heavy preclusionary evidence against young Earth creationism. And I'll back up a little bit because I started talking about biology and evolution. Evolution explains a lot about biology, and we've discovered a lot about biology via evolution and vice versa. So things like, why don't we have mitochondrial DNA in our nuclear DNA? Why are these separate? And that's only explainable by evolution. It's actually precluded. This evidence precludes creationism, because otherwise this would have to mean that we have a deceptive God, because there's no functional reason why we have to have mitochondrial DNA. That's, if you don't know what mitochondria is, the powerhouse of the cell. That's the meme. But they have their own separate DNA. It's plasmid like bacteria, which means that it's a circular DNA. It's completely separate from the rest of our DNA. We only inherit mitochondria through the maternal line. So there's a question of why that's separate. There are organisms that don't have it separate, that do have mitochondrial DNA in their nuclear DNA. So there's no actual reason why a creator God would do that. And it aligns much better with the observed phenomena of endosymbiosis, which we've observed organisms doing, where single cells will take up other single cells, or bacterial cells. They are also single cells, but they have the same type of same type of DNA, non-nuclear DNA, as our mitochondria. And we've seen that with things like, I'm not going to pull up anything right now, but amoebas have, and I don't know what the verb is, endosymbiosed these type of bacteria, and some of them have evolved along with them to retain this bacteria multiplying inside of them, just like our mitochondria do today. So there's a lot of things like that aren't explainable through creationism, that actually weakly, I would say, is it's not an absolute defeater, but it does preclude the idea of a God who's going to put obvious evidence in there, because a God it seems deceptive. So that's the other part. The other major thing that would be deceptive is the age of the earth. Why would a god make the age of the earth very apparently old? But according to most of the vast majority of scientists apparently think that the evidence points to the earth being old. So an all-knowing God should know this, and so we can only conclude that he's being purposefully deceptive in setting up the universe like this. So the models don't really make sense in creationism. And there's nothing in creationism or in modern science or in anything really that can preclude evolution or old earth. So I've talked to many creationists. There is no proposed mechanism for a limitation to evolution that would preclude the evolution that is proposed by the theory. Of course, I'm not saying there is no limitation. Obviously, there is a limitation. The limitation is physics and also the traits of the parents. You can only work with what you inherited. So, but there is nothing that can preclude the changes that are predicted by evolution and observed in the fossil record. These are all very small changes. There's also the idea that there was hyper fast evolution off of the ark. And so there's a very confusing standard of biology with the creation scientists. They don't really understand evolution at all, really. I mentioned that there's the hyper evolution. There's also, so it just doesn't explain the data. Meanwhile, the current models can actually predict the evidence. So we have no preclusionary evidence for evolution and old Earth. And we have very weak evidence, I would say, for inclusion, inculpatory evidence, I think the word would be, for the creationist story. But there's heavy preclusionary evidence against creation. So the big one would be the heat problem. This stems from the fact that the Earth appears to be extremely old relative to the 6,000 years. I would say billions of years is pretty old. The radiometric decay, let's call them leftovers, the products, are so numerous that given the known rates of decay, of radiometric decay, radioactive decay, that would account for billions of years. And so the solution for that would be somehow this rate accelerated. This has not been observed. There's no known mechanism for this. God would have to selectively speed up some radiometric decay, but not others. And that would be both with different materials and different locations of the same material, since we have different rates of, if we're assuming accelerated decay, we have different rates of acceleration according to how high the rock strata are, and as well as there's different ages measured coming laterally off of things like fault lines where there's lava continuously coming out of that. So that's a major problem. So we're already in miracle territory. Magic is really the only solution. But if all of that is true, we have a major heat problem. And that's only one factor of the heat problem, because radioactive decay produces a lot of heat, but so do meteors. Is it an asteroid or a meteor when it strikes the Earth? I don't remember. But they produce heat. There have been so many confirmed hits over a period of time. If we scrunch that into 6,000 years, that puts a lot of heat into it. There's also catastrophic plate tectonics, which is quick movement of plates that produces a lot of heat as well. So that even creationist institutes agree that this is a problem. There's heat produced at orders of magnitude that would vaporize the Earth several times over. That's hundreds of thousands of thermonuclear bombs per square mile. And this would also literally boil the blood of Noah. But again, if God is somehow interfering to say, well, the potassium in Noah isn't going to accelerate, but the potassium in the Earth is going to, I'm not sure why this is happening. It seems like an ad hoc explanation. So there is no current explanation for this.
20 seconds.
This is an extremely strong preclusion to the Genesis flood theory, as well as I suppose I'll go over why the Bible is not trustworthy. A historical document that has to do with there are historical claims, but there are also miraculous claims. No one can in history, no historians consider miraculous claims in other documents to be reliable.
Okay, Taylor, thank you very much for the 12-minute opening statement. David and Taylor, that concludes the opening statements for the debate. I want to remind the audience, firstly, I am all caught up on questions. And if you do have a question for our Q&A period, please do make sure that you are sending them in, tagging me, letting me know who the question is for. The topic, young Earth creation on trial. So with that, David McQueen, we are transitioning into the 8-minute uninterrupted rebuttal portion of the debate. And so when you're ready, David, you have 8 minutes to rebut Snape. Go ahead.
Okay, I've got my timer set here, and here would be the rebuttal to what he has brought up. If those of you that are interested in an hour's worth of critique of especially the first 5 of these rebuttal points of mine, you'll find this on Standing for Truth, but I'm going to make initial comments about each one. I compliment Taylor in bringing up the heat problem, but I am critical of his analysis of it because in the work that George and I have done over the last 12 months, it's become clear to us that it's the evolutionary community that have an enormous heat problem in comparison to the young Earth viewpoint. For those of you that are watching, be clear on the fact that I not only am a young Earth creationist, but I'm also a proponent of catastrophic plate tectonics. So that as the continents broke up during the time of the Great Flood, there was rapid movement of these continental masses. How do you dissipate the heat, and why was the heat dissipated? The best 2 arguments on that point deal with heat sinks, both in regard to what are called blobs, B-L-O-B-S, blobs that are found underneath Hawaii and other underneath Africa, and these features at the crust mantle boundary provide a way of explaining the heat signature of the Earth. My part of this research has been to look at the differential equations that dictate the mantle creep at the crystallographic level. I'm trained as a crystallographer. I'm trained in physical chemistry, and that is a counter argument. It's interesting that Taylor argued that it's the ignorance of young earth creationists regarding evolution that gives us, in his mind, such a powerful argument. That if we really did understand evolution, we would understand that the fossil record provides a record, an evidence, an objective evidence of the evolution of species with time. That is not true, and it has not been true in the arguments that have been going on since Darwin's day, and especially after World War II, when men like Dr. Henry Morris and Dr. Duane Gish began debating this issue. Gish's argument is as true today as when he first said it. If you go to the Grand Canyon and you look at the presence of trilobites, the presence of some fish fossils, and then you go up in the canyon to reptilian footprints, all of these fossils appear abruptly and fully formed. Taylor is wrong because he's missing the importance that there are no transitional forms for a trilobite. There are no transitional forms for a fish like a bass, for example, and certainly no transitional forms for reptiles and amphibians. My next point is a critique of Taylor's argument that we've got items in the scientific literature which preclude a creationist viewpoint. Now, I think that points 3 and 4 are tied together. Taylor, you're committing a logical fallacy in what's called an appeal to authority. Now, it's interesting how this cuts two ways, doesn't it? I'm presenting an argument that the Bible can be trusted as a historical document because in every area archaeologically that we can find, those of us that are Christians, the Bible is supported. And so when you go from archaeological support to Genesis 1 through 11, there is an appeal to authority, with the authority being God's word. My counter argument, my rebuttal to Taylor, is that his appeal to authority is, oh, McQueen, you're professors at the University of Tennessee, and you're professors at the University of Michigan and other places I've gone in my life, disagreed with you. They pointed out that the earth had to be young. And why, McQueen, are you so foolish in thinking that there are arguments for a young earth, like the decay of the earth's magnetic field and this issue of the formation of deltas? Well, I consider that an appeal to authority, and I'm going to stand my ground on that particular issue. Over the years, I've had the opportunity to teach biology, and I can remember so clearly having my students memorize deoxyribonucleic acid and RNA and so forth. And the very argument that Taylor brought up about mitochondrial DNA, it doesn't matter if the DNA in the mitochondria is more like a plasmid. The issue is how Taylor, in the origin of the Earth, in an old Earth model, can you ever get a fully functional first cell? So I would challenge you to bring that up as the debate goes on. DNA is as much an argument as this model of the human heart is, with its complicated 4 chambers and so forth. I would argue that DNA and a heart like this is an evidence for intelligent design.
30 seconds.
intelligent design. Thank you, Donnie. The last two arguments, his argument regarding the fossil record, we will return to. All fossils appear abruptly and fully formed. And then his belief, his faith in radiometric dating is based on a false assumption. And that false assumption is the evidence of the constancy of radioactive decay with time. Thank you, Donnie.
Thank you, David, for that 8-minute rebuttal. We're now going to hand it over to Snake. Snake, you also have 8 minutes for your uninterrupted rebuttal. Whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Okay, so maybe I'll just start with the accusation of the appeal to authority. I don't think I ever appealed to authority. I did mention consensus, but I never actually said it's consensus, therefore it's true. I actually, the only context that I used consensus in was just to say what it was. But I did explain how multiple different consensus actually cross-confirm each other, which is more than just someone smart thinks it, therefore it's true. So the fact that all these different methods are coming to the same conclusions is good evidence that for cross confirmation. And again, that's kind of like the argument that you used in your opening for why are all the numbers coming together. It's just on a much higher scale, and also is supported more by demonstrable science. So the consensus is demonstrable and thus held in consensus. So what's important about consensus is that you can actually go and find why people have the consensus. And it's almost always, there are some times where it's just kind of a zeitgeist and not, and science is designed to eliminate that as much as possible. But you can go find the source of the consensus, and they're all demonstrable experiments or numbers. There really isn't any of that for creationism. There's just kind of the Bible says so, and we're going to try and poke holes in the consensus. Unfortunately, there is a lot more evidence for the consensus. So a good example is, how do you get a fully functional first cell? Well, there's been a lot of work on this. They're called Jiwanu, are a type of protocell that actually forms in a laboratory experiment, and they can grow and divide. They don't have genetic information. So, but there, so the point that I'm trying to make is, the question is, how do you get a fully functional first cell? Well, not really the point of the debate, but how did God do it? Let's put those both in context. So we don't know how the first cell came about naturally. We don't know how God made the first cell either, whether he made all the cells at once or not. Did they just poof into existence all at the same time? And if so, did he move the air molecules out of the way first? What happened? What mechanism does that have? Or did he kind of use cosmic tweezers to move each molecule where he needed to? Or did he use similar experiments to what's going on in Origin of Life research to actually produce these chemicals in a chemistry stepwise fashion? We don't know. There's no proposition. There are no experiments. If we adopt this hypothesis, it gets us nowhere. But if we adopt the hypothesis of abiogenesis, we actually start discovering things. So to put it in perspective, if you can say God just did it, we can just say nature did it. and they have the same level of intellectual rigor and work, which is pretty much none. So, but if we go with the hypothesis God did it, there's no evidence for it. There's no proposed mechanism. There's no information we can gain from that hypothesis. If we go with nature did it, we actually do have several proposed mechanisms. There are very close approximations. It actually helps us get closer to discovering actually what happened, or just discovering new chemistry, even if it's not what happened. So it's actually a useful hypothesis. So, but there are hundreds and hundreds of experiments filling in little gaps in the puzzle. So we have a lot more information weighting the scale towards that. So as far as the rest of it, to address the heat problem, I don't know what the heat problem of the old Earth is. I don't recall. If you said it, I missed it. But the proposed lava blobs cooling down the Earth, I'm not quite sure how molten hot lava is going to cool off the Earth to anything cooler than the lava itself. It's actually like, it doesn't matter how big the Earth is. It's hot all the way down, too hot for human life, too hot for the oceans to even still exist. We still haven't gotten rid of the radioactive problem that would kill off Noah on the surface, even if we got rid of all the heat. But again, the lava can only cool things down to the temperature of the lava. And when it's cooling things down and it's actually heating up, so the lava is going to heat up. So we can never get the Earth cooler than lava that's hotter than it is right now using your proposed mechanism. So that's still going to kill everything and evaporate the oceans. I do not have faith in radiometric dating. Again, that's very well evidenced. It's not faith or an assumption that the radiometric decay rates are what they are. We observe this. There hasn't been a change in it. That's about as good as evidence as you're ever going to get. The only rebuttal is, well, maybe some magic happened in the past that would have changed that. True, anything could happen. Maybe magical ducks rode on fairies and shot laser beams at it and ate the heat. I don't know. Anything could happen, but we don't have evidence for that. We don't have evidence that there was accelerated nuclear decay. And if there was, we have an even bigger problem which is the heat problem. Let's see here. And the idea that, well, the old Earth also has a heat problem. That's just the tu quoque fallacy. You don't actually solve it for yourself. I guess I'll wrap it up touching on biology a little bit. There actually is a lot of transitional for trilobites. They start off really small and barely trilobite-like, and then we see gradually, step
30 seconds.
They radiate in different directions. They get spiky, they get bigger, they get more complex. Their eyes get more complex. Same with fish. Reptiles and amphibians, we have transitions between them and fish. We have transitions between fish and lots of other types of fish and worms, fish and eel type fish. Without bones, we see evolution of bones going on. And there's a problem with I didn't bring this up at first. There's a similar parts argument that's always brought up, which is that things are similar.
10 seconds.
So they must have had the same creator. Well, that just means that they're so similar as to be covered by microevolution, which is admitted by creationism. And I didn't get to genetic arguments like ERVs, but maybe we can talk about that.
Okay. That is 8 minutes, Snake, for your rebuttal. Gentlemen, great job so far. That concludes the opening statements and the rebuttals. Lots of excellent points for us to discuss in the 40-minute discussion. But before we get to that portion of the debate, we do have a roughly 5-minute break, David and Taylor. And so feel free to take that break and we'll reconvene in roughly 5 minutes.
Thank you, Donnie. Go ahead and drop my video and I will go get some coffee.
Okay. We'll see you soon, David. Refilling that coffee sounds like a great idea. So what I'll do is go over some announcements and reminders. Guys, we have a lot to look forward to. As a matter of fact, next week sometime, Snake will be back to debate T-Rock. Evolution, is there evidence for evolution? So I'm excited for that one. That'll make for, from my understanding, a debate trilogy as well between Snake and T-Rock. Tonight is the completion of a debate trilogy between Snake and David. And so if you have not yet seen their previous two debates, please do check it out. It'll be tough to top the 3 debate trilogies that Snake has had with Kent. Basically 9 debates. So speaking of that, Grayson, he'll be having his endgame debate with Dr. Dino at the end of this month. And so that should be fun. This time it'll be the fossil record and the geologic column. So hot topics there. Definitely looking forward to that one. We've got Mark Siegel. He debated T-Rock, or he debated David McQueen about a month or 2 ago, probably closer to 2 months now, because last month David McQueen debated Conspiracy Cats. I collaborated with Modern Day Debate, and that was a fantastic debate. I enjoyed that one. So Mark Siegel will be back. Him and T-Rock will be debating the worldwide flood. Doesn't modern geology disprove a worldwide flood? So you are not going to want to miss out on that one. Mark and T-Rock, both well-studied, well-educated on the topic of the flood. So I know this will be a technical one, but it will be a comprehensive one. We've also got our 2-debate event, 2-in-1. I am pumped for this one. This is at the beginning of May. So May, I have been booking fast. I'm actually starting to book for June. May, I've got a ton of debates confirmed now that over the next few weeks, you'll see slowly pop up on the channel in the upcoming live stream section. I've booked one that I'm looking forward to on the rapture. It'll be Pastor Tommy McMurtry and Nick Sayers. Is the pre-tribulation rapture biblical? I've got a few in the works on dispensationalism and replacement theology. We've got lots of debates on soteriology coming up, guys. So it's going to be the summer of debates, put it that way. And of course, lots of creation versus evolution debates. So this will be the first week of May. It'll be one event. So probably be about 3.5 hours to 4 hours. Part 1, it's the fossil record challenge. So David McQueen will be debating Grayson from base theory for the first half. And then the second half will be T-Rock versus Grayson. So Grayson has some challenges related to the fossil record. And David and T-Rock, being young earth creationists, they are going to engage those challenges. I'm pumped for that one. People have been talking about how much they'd love to see more pre-millennial versus amillennial type debates. So we've got this one coming up as well, April. So Pastor Anthony Aquino, Stacy Turbeville, both excellent debaters. The Great Millennium Debate is the 1,000 years future. So this is coming up soon as well. Guys, great diversity of topics. First week of May, we've got Dr. Robert Sungenis. He'll be back here with us. He'll be debating Steve Christie. So Steve will be back as well. Steve did a similar debate a couple of weeks ago with Chuck Official. They debated the Marian dogmas. Robert Sungenis is one of the most well-known Roman Catholic apologists. So he's the perfect guy to debate this topic. So I'm pumped. Steve knows his stuff. Robert knows his stuff. They're both excellent debaters. So this is going to be an epic showdown. I'm looking forward to this one. We've got some oneness Trinity debates coming up too, for those who love their nature of God debates. Kelly Powers, Caleb Percher, they'll be here to debate, is the oneness of God doctrine supported by the New Testament? So that's coming up soon as well. And we've got a few open mic debate nights coming up for you too. So people love the open mics. I love the open mics because they're lively, they're unpredictable. You never know what to expect. And there's always many clip-worthy moments in these open mics. So this one will be on the 15th of May, defending the Trinity with Matt Slick. So anybody is free to join. have impromptu debate discussion with Matt. I'll be moderating. So whether you're of the oneness persuasion, modalist persuasion, Unitarian persuasion, feel free to join. It is scheduled now over a month in advance. Give yourselves plenty of time to prep. May 1st, we're having another open mic on evolution with Kent. So that'll be, again, May 1st. The last one we did was about 8 hours, first 2.5 hours with Kent, and then the last 6 or so hours with whoever wanted to join. That was fun. And then we're currently picking a day in June to have an open mic debate night with the Creation Research team, John Mackay, the Creation guy, and Joseph Hubbard. So once we pick a date, I'll set that, and that should be fun. Taylor, he's had a debate with Joe Hubbard, probably going back on 2 years ago now. That was an excellent debate. And so it'll be fun to see some impromptu back and forth between evolutionists within the debate community and the Creation Research team. And that'll comprise multiple topics: creation, evolution, the age of the earth, whatever topic is your favorite, we can engage it. So we've also got Bill Morgan coming back here at the end of this month. He's going to be giving a presentation, feedback control systems. Should be fun. We'll be doing this live, so we'll be having a live Q&A. And a lot of people expressing how interested or how hyped they are for this debate. So this will be, we've done lots of open mic debates. We've done lots of panel debates, especially on soteriology. But from my understanding, this will be our first 2-verse-2 formal debate on the channel, although we've hosted about 300 debates. So I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure. And so I'm pumped for this one. Turretin Fan and Dan Chapa, they'll be debating Charles Jennings and Eli Haytov. All 4 of these gentlemen have been here before. They've all had many debates. They're all seasoned. They all know their stuff on soteriology. And so this is going to be a soteriology showdown. 2 versus 2. It's going to be comprehensive. Lordship salvation versus free grace theology. What is true biblical salvation? Another hot topic, another controversial topic. And so I think it's going to be a great thing to get these guys in the ring to duke it out. And last thing I'll say before Professor David McQueen comes back with us with a nice hot fresh coffee is podcast debates. So we've done now a couple. You can go to the SFT podcast website. I think there's close to about 140 episodes currently. And you can listen to them on Apple, Spotify, Google, whatever your favorite podcast is. And I've specifically been doing SFT podcast debates. Taylor and I did one a couple months ago now on genetic entropy. Grayson and I did one just a couple weeks ago on chromosome 2 fusion. That was a fun one. And so those are both on the podcast, available for people to listen to. For those that prefer the podcast, you can find our debates and events also on the website, standfortruthministries.com, which I am going to be working on in the next couple of days to get fully updated for people to check out. So that being said, I am working on getting some more podcast debates in. Snake and I are also working on getting another formal debate in on ERVs, our favorite topic, right, Snake? So lots to look forward to all. And with that, David, good to have you back. I just ran out of reminders and announcements, so you chose to come back at the right time. I was waiting there at the end. Okay, David, good to have you back. Nice, fresh, hot cup of coffee. Taylor, hope you're refreshed as well. Good to go. So, gentlemen, since we are actually, David, a little bit of background noise from you, feedback. Let me fix that real quick.
Okay, thank you.
David, can you click this? I'm not sure if you can see settings on the bottom of your screen.
Let's see. Yeah, I can see settings. Sure.
Actually, you know what? I think your background noise is solved, so don't even worry. Leave things the way they are because it's sounding good now.
Okay, good. My wife and daughter are having a conversation about 10 meters away, so that may be bleeding over to us.
Okay, no worries at all, David. So, as we are now entering the open discussion, everybody's favorite part of these debates, lots of points on the table, but I do want to remind Taylor and David, we got 40 minutes, so I really want to utilize our time wisely and to the best that we can. Title, Young Earth Creation on Trial. Snake just ended with his rebuttal, 8 minutes. David, you brought up several points being in the affirmative tonight in your opening statement. Why don't you pick one? And we'll allow you and Taylor to go back and forth on it for a little bit. The floor is yours, guys. Let's have some fun.
Okay, I want to respect the fact that Taylor is a trained biologist, trained in microbiology, and also trained in formal debate. And so let's start out with this rebuttal. You talked about possible evidence for the first cell. My critique of you, my friend, is that you're missing the epistemology of all this. In other words, from a philosophical standpoint, I have, as a Christian and as a creationist, no problem in commenting that the Creator God is the first cause of, from a philosophical standpoint, of the first cell. But please answer this, Taylor. How in the world can you go from the protocells that you mentioned to a fully functional, from my biology teaching in the past, how can you explain the endoplasmic reticulum, the nuclear membrane, the presence of DNA, the mitochondrial? We've already talked about that. You've already talked about it. But how would you respond to my criticizing you that you actually are expressing as much faith in this first cell as I am in the first cause?
Yeah, so I would push back on the fact that I'm expressing as much faith because, again, there's tons of evidence about how certain things form, like how a membrane forms, how nucleotides form, how they come together naturally, and there's evidence that they do occur naturally, and how there is a right-handedness or left-handedness. There are natural ways to purify them, and we've observed them. And so there's actually a lot of evidence. Now, it isn't known how it happened. So, but I want to stress that it is not expressing as much faith because we have a lot of evidence while there is nothing known about how God created life at all. So I would push back on that part. And I'll continue unless you have something to say about that.
May I respond, Donnie?
Yes, go ahead, David. We're going to make this free flowing. So whatever you guys want to talk about, go ahead.
Now, Taylor, I would accuse you of arguing that God is left-handed. How come in living cells, the racemization, the nature of the organic molecule always shows a left-handed side when you get down to the level of your expertise, molecular biology? Is God left-handed? Is that why everything is left-handed in a modern cell?
Well, it could come down simply to chance because there is racemization on both sides that naturally occurs, or the breaking of racemization. So it could simply be chance that some pool with a bunch of left-handed molecules, that was the one that succeeded. So therefore, all of its descendants are going to have the same handedness. It's not known, but there are mechanisms that are known how this symmetry breaking can occur. And we find it naturally occurring as well. Like in meteorites, there is an asymmetry to the handedness.
Okay, may I give a challenge to Taylor about one of my topics about river deltas?
Well,
Absolutely.
I would still love to stay on this topic though for a little bit. I had a
Oh,
lot more
I'm
to say.
sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to
Oh,
interrupt.
okay,
Yeah.
let's do this, David and Taylor. Taylor, finish your thoughts.
Mhm.
David, feel free to give a response. And I'd say sometime in the next few minutes, let's transition to one of David's lines of evidence for young earth creation. Since young earth creation is on trial, I want us to focus on that as much as we can. And so go ahead, Taylor, with your
All
response.
right. I'd like to pick some of the topics too, since I'm the prosecutor, of course, but we'll get to that. So yes, to clear up a little bit of misconception. So the first cells would be very simple, and we have an idea of what that would look like because we have an idea of what the simplest cells would look like. So we don't need things like nuclear membranes, although it's pretty easily explainable how a membrane gets inside of another membrane. But we know the simplest cells do not have nuclear membranes. So things like bacteria, they have very simple DNA structure. It's not folded up like ours is. It's not all tangled up and doesn't really need to be unpacked. It's in a circular plasmid. Ours is much more tightly packed. So the bar to get to this complex eukaryotic cells that we have today, that would not be forming back then. That's not part of anyone's hypothesis. So we're looking at much simpler structures. And I mentioned the Jiwanu, that we can actually form cell-like structures that do replicate. They make more of themselves and they grow. It's really the genetic structure that there are gaps in knowledge on. And that would lead me to my question, which would be, if there are holes in this knowledge, should that preclude our knowledge on the age of the Earth?
Yes, I would. I would respond to that before I bring up an young Earth issue. Uh, one of the things that troubles me about your line of argument is this whole argument of the preclusionary nature and the accusation that uh, Donnie and me and George appeal to magic somehow to have the heat go away and have the radioactive decay not affect Adam and Eve or Noah and his family. That's simply not true. Um, uh, the um, the counter argument that I would go back to repeatedly is, show me in Precambrian rocks, for example, like the Ediacaran fauna, um, widely touted as being right at 600 million, 700 million, 800 million years old, Ediacaran. Where is there evidence, Taylor, of cellular evolution in the rock record of the Ediacaran, the lower Cambrian?
I don't think there would be very good evidence because individual soft cells don't preserve very well in fossil record. But I'll circle back to that in a second. But to address your point about magic and miracles, the point that I was trying to make is that either there's some kind of new knowledge that we would need to have that we don't have that would break the currently known physics or supersede it in some exotic way. Like the Ray project said that we would need exotic new physics to be able to solve the heat problem, or you'd need a miracle. Of course, miracles and magic can solve anything. So I'm not accusing you necessarily of using that as your explanation, but you either have something that you either need something you don't have yet, which is some exotic new physics or chemistry, or because we don't know what God did to actually assemble cells. Was it magic? I don't know. I don't know if you proposed that. I don't know if you proposed it was a miraculous just poof, or if he kind of had a laboratory. But again, you either need something you don't have right now, or you need miracles. Miracles can explain anything, but they're not scientifically useful, and they're not evidenced by anything. It's just kind of a just so story. But if to get back on the point of preclusionary evidence, I'd like to get back there as a point of methodology. But if you had anything to say,
Yeah,
in response,
may I go to a critique of you in the sense that you have not given a proper rebuttal to my argument regarding the Mississippi River Delta. This is about a 5-hour drive south of where I live. There's Lake Pontchartrain, New Orleans, and what's called the Birdfoot Delta. And you can see the bird feet of that delta. My challenge to you is, if you go back to work that was done in the mid 1800s, this is documented by Rasmussen and is based on a scientist named Humphreys. He came up with an age of that delta as being about 4,500 years old. This is a document from the 1850s. Figuring that you would jump right on that as being too old, I went to the literature, the coastal wetlands literature, and if you go to a website, CWPPRA, that's the acronym pronounced CPRA, I think, or KEPRA, you'll find an article going back to 1990 that concludes that sediment deposition occurred on the Birdfoot Delta around 5,000 years. What? Are you saying a modern analysis confirms something from the 1850s? Well, it does. Here's a sad part of where I live. There's about a football field worth of sediment per hour that's being eroded in South Louisiana. And that brings my challenge to you. Why would there be any delta at all? If this whole process goes back to Jurassic over millions of years, why would there be a Mississippi Delta at all? And then please answer one.
I don't want to kind of ignore this, but I still wasn't done with the cell argument.
I don't know what to do, Donnie. What should I do?
Well,
I think
why don't we do this since
right
it is more
back to
free
that.
flowing? It looks like there's a few points on the table, Taylor.
Yeah,
feel
'cause
free to
it's-
respond now, anything cell wise, and then also maybe add in a counter or your thoughts to what David said, and then we'll kind of just run from there.
Yeah, it just seemed kind of an abrupt transition. But the point I was trying to, I'll get to it. I don't want to ignore that. But the point I was trying to get to is how gaps in our knowledge are not preclusionary to the old Earth. So even if we had no idea how life got here, that doesn't somehow show, okay, so the Earth can't be that old. And I just want your thoughts on that, whether you think that if we don't know how something formed, that means that somehow we don't know how old other things are.
Okay, let me respond.
Or if it's just a gap that we don't know.
Well, the philosophical aspects in the philosophy of science that you are revolving around this preclusionary idea,
mm-hmm.
Would I expect you to know every detail about what happened 600 million years ago at the beginning of the Cambrian? Of course not. You were not there. Nobody was there 600 million years ago. But my counter argument to that comes from Genesis chapter 5. If I'm claiming that the Bible is a reliable historical document, and this is a modern translation of Genesis 5:1, this is the written account of the descendants of Adam when God created human beings. He made them to be like himself. He created them male and female and blessed them to be called human. When Adam was 130 years old, he became the father of a son who was just like him in every image, and he named his son Seth. after the birth of Seth, Adam lived another 800 years and died at 930. So my argument is that as a Christian, as a creationist, and as someone who is a defender of the truth of the Bible, I would counter argument that yes, the young earth position does have a reliable eyewitness that passed information down over the last 6,000 years.
Okay, but would you agree that just because there's gaps in our knowledge about how things formed, that doesn't necessarily mean that precludes our knowledge on the age of the earth, right? Like I could even concede God created life, billions of years ago. So the age of the earth would be a different question than how life occurred.
And I do want to respond to that in the following way. My counter argument to much of what you've said is that you, as a young scientist and someone who is interested in the NFL, National Forensic League, formal debates, you have to put your faith in certain authorities, in certain points of view. I have chosen to put my faith in arguments such as, I use this here. Here's a polonium halo from Bob Gentry's work. And later on, if we get some questions on it, I'll actually read to you again, I think, what I've read before from Gentry's article about alpha decay theory. And very clearly he shows that from radioactive halos, even using evolutionary arguments, there is a 35% error rate if you choose a line of argument more in line with a young Earth. It turns out that the rate of radioactive decay is not constant. Okay. So it has been shown to not be constant. Your response to that, my friend?
Okay, so there's a couple things there. I still don't feel like I got a confirmation on whether gaps preclude it or not, but I guess I'll move on.
Oh, no, let me respond to that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
By faith, there are gaps in what I know in the sequence of events from Genesis 1 through 11. So I fully acknowledge that your faith and evolutionary viewpoint, of course, you've got gaps in your knowledge because from the standpoint of epistemology, we both are putting our faith in something.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, I would push back on that last part, but I would say that just in the same vein, the fact that you don't know how God created something is not evidence that it didn't happen, right? So,
correct. That's correct.
Right. And so, yeah, I would argue that I don't have to use faith for a lot of the sciences, because even things I have no idea about, because I can look at the results. I don't need to know what the scientists know to know that they know what they're talking about, because they can actually produce technology and things that make new discoveries. So I'm not seeing that from any of the biblical stuff. So I would not equate those things. And if you want, I can go and respond to some of the biblical stuff, or I can go back and respond to the river deltas.
Yes, please. I want to hear your rebuttal of this conjunction of arguments from the 1850s, 1990s. There's also, I pointed out earlier that if you go to the archaeological literature about the Nile Delta, Stanley's work in 2019 put the Nile Delta at 4,000 years BP, or 2,000 years AD. And this is from the Journal of Coastal Research, published in 2019. What do you make of that, Taylor?
So I'm not quite understanding. Is the argument simply that they are the age that you expect them to be?
Oh no, not at all.
Because
Try
we
to
would expect
clarify.
if the age of the Earth is billions of years old, we would expect that there are things on the Earth that are younger than the entire Earth that have
Oh, of
formed.
course, yeah.
You
And
know,
one of the problems I have with your evolutionary view is the whole idea that all of the world's oceans are younger than Jurassic. We can come to that later on, but let me draw this so that you can be clear about this. Um, so here is north. Here's the Mississippi River coming down to the Delta, and NO will stand for New Orleans. The Nile flows to the north, and there's a delta on this is the Nile River now, and this is Egypt. I'll put E here. How come the secular community? Now, I'm not talking about uh, Donnie and me as young Earth creationists. I'm saying the secular community says that the uh, uh, delta of the Mississippi River dates from after the last ice age at about 4,500 years. The archaeological argument from this fellow Stanley in 2019 is that the delta of the Nile River is about 4,000 years old. Why should these, why is it that you can go worldwide and look at deltas, the receding of waterfalls like Niagara Falls, and uh, the great beautiful falls in Zimbabwe, Africa, that Stanley and the others found, Victoria Falls. If these are being eroded at the rate that I commented earlier, like in New Orleans, this is going away a football field an hour's worth of volume. Why is there any delta at all, my friend?
why I'm not sure why that would be a challenge to the scientific consensus that there's a delta at all. The age does seem convenient for your side, but again, I would expect there to be things that are 5,000 years, 6,000 years, 7,000, 10, 20, etc. on the face of the Earth. But I would counter to say that we have geological formations that are much older than that, such as the Grand Canyon. If we take similar things like you mentioned, erosion, that would the erosion that occurs at deltas, if we apply that to things like the Grand Canyon, and of course other dating methods cross confirm each other for that we can apply to the Grand Canyon as well. But that would also that just erosion rates on the Grand Canyon would be in the millions of years.
Well, this is an
And to
interesting
address
point.
to address your Gentry's polonium decay,
Yes,
we talked about this a little last time, and
yes.
Jordan, with Reason to Doubt, also pointed this out, that in Gentry's book, he does admit a couple of times that this is within the normal range of natural decay, and as well as Snelling points out that these are not primordial rock samples, so it's not even really what we should be looking at.
Okay, now, for those of you that are watching this debate with fresh eyes, you may know that Andrew Snelling is a young Earth creationist and a colleague of mine. You also may know that I disagree with him on his argument in his big book that the radioactive halos are best explained as essentially what Gentry would call secondary halos. Um, so I hope you see that within the creation community, we have legitimate scientific arguments of points of disagreement. But I hope you also see that the same kind of faith that a lot of the colleagues of and atheists like Taylor have, their faith is based on a similar thing, and they argue from a similar position. What is
But
my
I
point?
would,
My point is this: if I'm allowing you to talk about the first cell and preclusionary arguments and so forth, then you must allow creation scientists the same latitude.
Okay, Taylor, go ahead. Equal time to respond to whatever you'd like to.
yeah, I would point out that they're not equal because one side has a lot more evidence. I've already been over that, but so that there is just faith, it seems, on the side of the religion. But the thing that I wanted to point out is that it's not atheists. I do happen to be an atheist, but it's not atheists who are solely on the side of the scientific consensus. In fact, most scientists are Christian and also agree with the consensus conclusions about the age of the Earth. So, yeah, I just would say that there seems to be, again, I guess we could ignore preclusionary evidence for this point. There doesn't seem to be any corroborating evidence for most of the biblical story, and no hypothesis we can draw from that can actually predict data or produce technologies, whereas on the side of the scientific consensus that actually is present, and so they're actually producing something that I can look at and say, okay, so these people have a hypothesis and they're actually producing something. It seems like there's an unequal weight of evidence.
Okay.
And before you respond, David, I'll jump in real quick.
Okay.
You both are doing a fantastic job on time and also picking topics and spending a good amount of time on them. What we can do, David, of course, after you respond, and if you'd like to do this, Snake, correct me if I'm wrong, David picked the first two topics, organic evolution and now river deltas. And so once we've finalized these two topics, Taylor, we can allow you to pick a couple topics and prosecute David's position of young earth creation. So with that, David, go ahead, feel free to respond, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, my critique of your position does not actually revolve only on an argument of an atheist to someone that believes that God exists, but it also revolves around the idea that I freely acknowledge and have argued for 40 years with a position that's called old earth creationism. The idea that God created, that the days of Genesis are periods of time, the way Hugh Ross teaches about it. I have argued with people that have talked about how you can fit the fossil record into things. For tonight's debate, I went and dug out a 45-year-old Bible that I bought years ago that was written by a man named Schofield. And this Schofield Reference Bible goes back to actually 1909. It's an old Bible. And Schofield influenced a whole generation of people, including me in the early days of my thinking, in the idea that there must be a gap between Genesis 1:1, 1:2, 1:3. And so what Schofield and many of his colleagues did, and what people like Hugh Ross continue to do, is to put the evidence for human evolution and stuff it in to a gap in the book of Genesis. What do you think of that, my friend?
I think that that's probably the wise move, because a lot of the Bible can be interpreted as stories and metaphor, and you can still retain some of the more legendary aspects like the resurrection, and still say, okay, this is kind of just an adaptation of the myths and legends of the people at the time, how they understood things. God's not going to come down and try to explain genetics to Iron Age people. But
I want to end it.
with our
Yeah, I want to end it there and give you the freedom to pick the next two topics. I'm going to
Yeah.
go ahead and erase the whiteboard.
Yeah, with our gonna try and squeeze these in here. So I guess I'll try and end on maybe the Bible, but I'd like to talk about biology, genetics for a second. And I know you're not a biologist, but this is an important point for me. I guess one of the main points here is methodology. So preclusionary evidence would be a big thing in my book. So it doesn't seem like you have preclusionary evidence. I brought up the heat problem. The other big preclusionary thing I would say is genetics. So endogenous retroviruses, I'm sure you've heard of these before.
Yes.
It should not be mathematically possible for us to have the same nested hierarchy of infections as apes and other mammals and animals beyond that. If these were just random infections and if they were not inherited, and if they were created, again, that would point to a deceptive God because they appear to be evidence against creationism. And it also doesn't, we could even assume that they're not viral infections. It would be impossible for them to be in the same sequence, in the same location, in the same nested hierarchies, because they are transposable elements that move around. They shouldn't be in the same place. And there's no reason for them to be in the same place because they could be in different places. It would be easy disproof for God to create into the creation, and yet he created something that looks not created.
My response to that is you're quite right. McQueen is not a biologist. Yet, in my 50 years of teaching, I've taught both at the college level and also high school biology. And so I do have an informed knowledge about DNA. Do I know about endogenous retroviruses at the level that Donnie does? No, I don't. But I do know what he's taught me over the last years by watching his debates with you and others. And I also am troubled, actually. I know enough to know that there are dozens of cell organelles in both a plant cell and also a human cell. How would you explain all of these interworking parts, the nuclear membrane, the cell membrane, the relationship between endoplasmic reticulum and DNA and the reproduction of RNA? And how would you explain all of that coming together, even if I grant you the debate point that you could produce a protocell?
Well, so I didn't hear a rebuttal to the minuscule chances of the ERVs occurring where they are. So what I heard was basically that the cell is too complex, so it's kind of not a problem anyway. Is that a fair characterization?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And see, what I challenge you to do, Snake, is to explain to our audience how in a evolutionary scenario of molecule to man over a billion years, but let's focus on the geologic evidence from the Ediacara fauna or whatever lower Cambrian you want to try to find. We can even go back to Preston Cloud's old argument about algal mats being an evidence in the Precambrian of simple organisms.
Yeah.
You haven't explained to me how all of the organelles, and let's just choose three, the mitochondria you've already mentioned, the endoplasmic reticulum, and the Golgi bodies, how could those three organelles have evolved?
Well, for the sake of time, I'll just again say that maybe this could be like the last part of this section, and we'll move on to the Bible. But again, this type of argument that it's too complex, it's not to know, or like you can't explain how these things arrived at the complexity that they're at. Again, that's not preclusionary towards old Earth or evolution. So we shouldn't expect to know. But what we do know is that we can observe that these systems can get more complex and can combine with each other and do change over time. So that would explain basically why simpler things can become more complex. Like we actually do observe this.
Now,
But
let me challenge you on this point on what you just said. So you're saying that you have no problem as a scientist in saying that time plus chance and impersonal forces created the first cell.
yeah, because that's been observed that that variation plus selection, various selection methods do cause increases in complexity, increases in function, and that has been observed, and on both the simulation level and the biological level in nature and in laboratories.
May I respond to your critique about the heat problem?
I
Or
suppose
would
so.
you rather
I did
go on
want to
to something?
touch on the reliability of the Bible.
Yes, please.
Okay. So I
Actually, Taylor, before you continue, what we'll do is, because I have 4 minutes of
yeah.
bonus minutes.
Okay.
So since we're at the 35-minute mark, Snake, take the next 5 minutes to touch on your chosen topic here with the Bible. And then in the bonus minutes, those 4 minutes, we'll take that time to discuss the heat problem. So we'll be able to get it all in there. So
Okay.
Thank you,
go ahead,
Ronnie.
gentlemen.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm just worried about time. So yeah, I would say that the Bible there are certain aspects of it that historians do use for historical cross confirmation. So basically, they're looking at other sources and saying, okay, this confirms this and this. There are legendary types of bonus minutes are the best minutes. Sorry, but there are legendary accounts that do have historical facts in them from different cultures all over the world, but there are also even historical claims in the Bible contradict each other. They're basically it conflates. Matthew claims that Jesus was born under Herod's reign, even though the histories would say that he died 4 years prior to Jesus's birth. We have evidence of who was in Egypt. There was no evidence of mass exodus, or I don't know what the opposite of mass residents that were Jewish living in Egypt. So historians do contradict the Bible on a lot of historical claims, even if they're not miraculous. The Gospels contradict each other on a lot of details, but a lot of this information is not first-person testimony. And so I would just reiterate my point that historians can't take seriously the miraculous claims, even in documents that they consider do have some historical basis, because that occurs all around the world with different religions, all kinds of things. So the methodology there is, why are we taking seriously every claim made in the Bible? And how do we know things like you mentioned that these are accounts of the descendants of Adam and things like that? How do we verify things like that when we can't verify miraculous things, and we can't verify even a lot of historical claims?
May I respond on your accusation about Herod, Donnie?
Yes, David, you can respond equal time to whatever you'd like to from Taylor.
In Matthew chapter 2, verse 1, it says, Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. The mistake that you're making, Snake, and so many others do, is there's more than one Herod mentioned in the early account of the book of Matthew, for example. There is Herod the Great, and then there is his son, Herod Antipas. In some field work I did in Israel 10 years ago, I got to actually go see the younger Herod's bedroom there near Jerusalem. And the archaeologists have universal agreement that Herod's son was the worst father, the worst king, the worst husband in antiquity. And so the link between the Herod talked about in the first part of Matthew chapter 2, and then the other Herod that came along, his son, is a point of archaeological fact that you're missing, Taylor.
Okay, fair enough. I would have to look more into that. I would add, though, and correct me if I'm wrong about this part, there was the census of Israel, which happened 10 years after the death of the Herod the Great, right? That's recorded in the Roman histories. So even if there is Herod, his son, this is actually the Bible is recording the wrong date for the census, which Rome has recorded at a different date. And
well, let me.
I was going to add something else, but go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. Let me challenge you on that point. The historian Josephus records in his history a discussion of the birth of Jesus. And in Josephus's account, now this is a Jewish historian. He's no follower of the Messiah. He doesn't even believe in Jesus the way Christians do. But Josephus himself said that there was a man named Jesus that was born in the time of Herod. And then he has the most delightful phrase. He said, if it be lawful to call him a man. So even a secular historian like Josephus acknowledged that there were some miraculous things revolving around Jesus of Nazareth that were hard to explain. Thank you, Taylor.
Yeah, that all kinds of people believed all kinds of gods were running around back in the Mediterranean. But my point was more on that the Bible recorded the date wrong, so that the fact that Josephus mentions Jesus, it doesn't really touch on that. The other thing that I was going to bring up, I think, was there were the gospel contradictions. So the point is just that the Bible isn't very reliable on a lot of these details. But one major thing I would say is the claim that corpses were raised after the resurrection and went throughout seeing their loved ones in Jerusalem. And this would seem like to be a very major event, that people's loved ones were resurrecting and coming to see them within Jerusalem. And this is recorded nowhere in any of the other histories, which we should have, because there are writings of that time from tons of other sources in the area, around the area. And so again, I would just ask what methodology are you using to kind of verify the Bible as wholly reliable, especially the miraculous events like that, which we should have other records of?
Well, let me critique you using the Watergate conspirators. You may know that Chuck Colson was one of the Watergate conspirators. unindicted co-conspirators. When I was in college in the early 70s, I followed the Watergate very carefully. Well, all those conspirators, and I'll use the number 10 and exclude G. Gordon Liddy from my argument, but within a year, every one of those unindicted co-conspirators gave up Nixon and were glad to see him forced to resign. Okay, now let's bring the analogy over to 10 of the 12 apostles. We won't talk about Judas Iscariot. Let's just choose the other 10. Every one of these, at the end of their life, could have saved their lives by recanting the gospel, recanting the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. The rabbis had already put out the word that these 10 disciples overcame battle-hardened Roman guards and stole the body of Jesus from the tomb and buried it somewhere in Gaza. And so the rabbis had a vested interest in the years after 33 AD of rounding up Matthew and John and ultimately the Apostle Paul, but I'll leave him out for now. Let's say John and Mark and Luke, rounding up these guys and saying, if you will only tell us where the body of Jesus is, we will let you live. A couple of them said, I'm unworthy to be crucified on a cross. Either crucify me upside down or put me on an X-shaped cross like on Game of Thrones or something and nail me up there and kill me. What's your explanation for why these men that were so close would not recant in the same way the Watergate co-conspirators did?
So you're talking about the martyrs?
Yes.
Right. So to my knowledge, there is just there are no martyrs that that we have any record that they had a chance to recant, and there are no records of firsthand records of martyrs doing so. There is, I think, only one record of someone who has who wrote a firsthand testimony of seeing Jesus, and that was Paul on the road to Damascus, and that was long after Jesus's resurrections, and it was the vision of Jesus. So we don't actually have any good historical evidence outside of just church tradition.
Donnie, do you want me to go on to this counter argument about the heat problem?
So what we'll do, Taylor and David, I think we've done an excellent job at keeping this debate thorough, talking about a diversity of topics within the greater scope of young earth creation. Snag, thank you for those two-ish topics there to discuss. For the bonus minutes now, we have exactly 4 minutes left. Why don't we now get into the heat problem? David, if we could, Taylor, could you take 1 minute to reiterate the argument, and then we'll allow David to respond to it, a little bit of back and forth on it, then we'll wrap things up. Taylor, go ahead.
Sure. There's three main sources of heat, which is radioactive decay, the catastrophic plate tectonics, the friction created by moving such massive amounts of rock at such high speeds, and asteroids hitting the Earth. And we have the evidence that all of that happened. The question is, how fast did it happen? And if it happened within 6,000 years, even if we're even just doing, let's say 10,000 years, that's orders of magnitude smaller, and the numbers have been crunched. Creationists agree on this. That would be heat equivalent to hundreds of thousands of thermonuclear bombs going off at the same time, or even over a year. That's still bad if you have hundreds of thousands of nuclear bombs going off in every single square mile on the Earth. That's So that's producing a lot of heat, and there's no way to get rid of it. There's no creationist organizations admit that they need new physics to explain it. They generally don't want to use miracles. So that's where we're at.
Snake, thank you very much. David, over to you for your counter or your response.
George Bond and I, for the last year, have been working on this heat problem. And here is a 3-minute summary of where we stand on the scientific side of this. I realize that many of my creationist buddies and many certainly old Earth creationists disagree with this analysis, but I think that it's true. The argument that Snake has given about the problems associated with heat is first shown to be wrong by calculus, and that's the argument based on the Carnot cycle. I would give the counter argument that Snake's viewpoint is actually producing a perpetual motion machine. The old Earth mantle crystal thermodynamics ends up as a perpetual motion machine. And here's the argument. Again, this is by calculus. Here's the Carnot cycle, as we all have seen in high school physics and college physics. There's pressure and volume, and then the amount of heat going in, the amount of heat coming out. Well, the calculus is the differential of pressure as a function of temperature, and that leads to the differential of heat, the Q, as a function of time. Some people use phi sub t as that, but my argument is that the evolutionary viewpoint that some sort of Earth dynamo can explain the reoccurrence of heat in the mantle actually is wrong, because it violates the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy must always increase in any system. But that's not my favorite argument. For many of you, it may be too late at night to go into differential equations. But Stacy, in his, he's a professor in Australia, in his book, talks about the differential equation associated with mantle creep. And I'll spare the whole audience the full details about epsilon dot there. Let me go down to make my point. If you had to suffer through differential equations like I have, you know that you start at the bottom and then you work back up. Some creationists like Larry Vardaman, for example, this drives him nuts, having to start at the bottom and then work back up through the equation. But that's the way differential equations work. You'll have to be like the old Pentecostal preacher said, put your hand on the TV screen and trust me on this. When you get down to the bottom of this argument, at a very small sigma, it turns out that this result, dealing with mantle creep, is what's called insufficient. Now, why in the world would that be an argument for Snake tonight? When a differential equation is insufficient, let me make sure I get the vocabulary right. When the math is insufficient, that is actually an argument for catastrophic plate tectonics.
Okay, so let's do this. David, I appreciate that summary. Taylor, we'll give you a 2-minute response in terms of a counter. Go ahead. We'll start now.
Okay. So, yeah, going back again, just because if we're going to grant this idea that it's insufficient, just because our current math can't explain a natural phenomenon, that's not preclusionary to things like knowing the age of the Earth. But when we have contradictions in how physics works, or with the story, such as that this proposed mechanism for why the Earth looks like it looks produces too much heat. This heat is contradictory to the claim that there was life, that Noah lived on this thing. That is contradictory, so it's preclusionary. The fact that we might not be able to explain where all the heat comes from the core of the Earth, that's just a gap in knowledge. That doesn't actually attack the old Earth position. It very weakly, if anything, supports the creation model. But again, we receive heat from the sun. This isn't a closed system. There's friction within the Earth itself, so it's converting stable chemical into heat energy. That's not against the laws of thermodynamics. And I'm not sure where you get the perpetual motion thing. The last thing, I'll just reiterate that if we have, I didn't hear a solution to the heat problem, just kind of a counterattack to the consensus. But the solution that you propose is, again, can never get the surface of the Earth cooler than lava. And in fact, if the lava is taking on heat, the lava is heating up. So we're actually going to end up, best case scenario, with a surface of the Earth that's hotter than normal lava.
Okay, Taylor, thank you so much. What I want to do, David, is give you, let's say, between 1 to 2 minutes to respond to anything you'd like to. But David, since you started the discussion, Taylor will give you 1 minute in terms of a final word, and then we're just going to jump right into our 5-minute closing statements to wrap up thoughts and points. So David, take 1 to 2 minutes right now to respond to anything you'd like to, and we'll start the clock now.
Taylor, I'm worried about you in the regard of some gaps in your knowledge. I know that from a debate standpoint, you've argued that there are gaps in my knowledge, but I worry that some of the issues, for example, you've got polonium halos with half lives of less than 5 minutes that are actually found in granites. It would seem to me, as a geologist and mineralogist, that finding those in biotites in granites would indicate eutectic crystallization, that they crystallize very rapidly. I think that you have not actually, nor none of your colleagues, correctly answered Gentry's argument that at least the decay rate cannot be shown by radioactive halos to be more accurate than 35% of the time. Not ignorant of the fact that that doesn't change a 5 billion year old Earth to 6,000 years, but it does introduce a 35% error. Secondly, I think that other arguments that we might talk about during the question time about population statistics indicating that the 8 billion people that are on Earth are too few, or the decay of the Earth's magnetic field indicating an Earth of 7,000 years old. Again, if you preclude a dynamo theory, these are good arguments, I think, and arguments that you're overlooking because of a bias, an argument to authority, and your own faith in an evolutionary viewpoint.
Good job. That's 2 minutes on the dot. So what we'll do, Taylor, now, because we do have some solid audience questions as well, Taylor, you get the last word for the discussion. So take 1 minute to respond to whatever you'd like to. And then anything you'd like to say, David, we do have 5-minute closing statements that we need to get to. So we'll jump into closings. Taylor, you get the last word. 1 minute. Go ahead.
Cool. Well, so as a non-geologist, I can only point to work done by all other geologists, and I can I'll just use, obviously, the majority of geologists completely disagree with those conclusions, but I can even use other creationist geologists, including Gentry himself, who said that it is within the range of the natural decay. Andrew Snelling disagrees with Gentry. He says that the polonium halos are not evidence of accelerated nuclear decay, but in fact, accelerated nuclear decay needs to be invoked to explain the halos because they look so old, according to him. And he, yeah, he just disagrees in general with a lot of the halo stuff. So, was there any? Yeah, I think that was all I needed to respond to. I'll get to the worldview stuff in the closing.
Perfect. David, Taylor, I got to say, I really enjoyed this debate. I really enjoyed the back and forth discussion. Very cordial, very professional, and you both did a great job at keeping it equally timed, but also focusing on one topic at a time. So with that, let's jump into some closing statements, which means to the audience, we have exactly 10 minutes left for you to get in your final questions for tonight. The topic, Young Earth Creation on Trial. David McQueen, 5 minutes. Whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Okay, I'm going to look at my clock here. How do I summarize my concern? My concern revolves around the issue of authority. Taylor has made a great argument, and from the standpoint of the National Forensic League, the debate points and who wins a debate, he has brought in a number of counter arguments, including counter arguments from my colleague Andrew Snelling. He knows of my disagreement, and we hope to get together in Australia in the years to come, and for him to show me some of the things he's seen there. Having said that, the fact that most people disagree with the viewpoint of young earth creationism doesn't mean that it's true. Or to put the argument on the other side, my arguments for a young earth allow me as a professional geologist to explain 9 out of 10 rock groups that I have seen worldwide as I have traveled. And so the fact that most people disagree with me doesn't concern me. My redheaded wife, Shirley, and I recently celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary. My wife doesn't agree with everything I say, but that doesn't mean that I'm not still right. No, she'll listen to this. She knows I'm not always right. So all joking to one side, let me conclude by reading a very interesting paragraph written by the AIG scientist Mortensen. Many of you know him. And he wrote this back in 2011. So this is a viewpoint that was in a small book called A Pocket Guide to Compromise. And here's what he says on page 85 of that book. He presents an argument on why Christians should not accept millions of years. And here is the way I will conclude. There is an intensifying controversy in the church all over the world regarding the age of the earth. And if you've listened to this debate, you see that that's true, even between an agnostic or no atheist like Taylor and me. For the first 18 centuries of the church history, the almost universal belief of Christians was that God created the world in 6 literal days, roughly 4,000 years before Christ, and then destroyed the flood in the time of Noah. And this is the precautionary side of what I have to comment about. The human cell, the DNA that we've argued about, in my mind, argues for an intelligent designer that is the first cause. That's the God of Genesis chapter 1. But we have to keep in mind that the creator God, by the time you get up to the sin of Adam and Eve, is the offended creator. We have offended this creator God. Many of the fraternity brothers that I would argue with 50 years ago at the University of Tennessee, they would say, "Oh, I'm not going to become a Christian," and then they would list some particular sin, drunkenness, promiscuity, that they enjoy more. Somewhere in their mind, they know that if they were to put their trust in this creator, they'd have to give that up. For most of human history, the foundational belief was that the earth was young. But let me read on. About 200 years ago, some scientists developed new theories about the age of the earth. They proposed that the earth and the universe were millions of years old. Why did they do that? If you say that organic evolution occurred in 6,000 years, nobody believed that. It's counterintuitive.
30 seconds.
A growing number of Christians, now called young earth creationists, including many scientists, hold to the traditional view, believing that it's the only view that is fully faithful to Scripture and that fits the scientific evidence far better than the old earth evolutionary view that Taylor has presented.
David, thank you very much for that 5-minute concluding statement. I have to say this debate has really flown by. I really enjoyed this. Snake, we're going to give you now 5 minutes for a closing statement. Whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I tried to focus on methodology tonight. How do we know things? And I don't think you need to have 100% certainty or 100% proof to be confident of science or scientific knowledge. So weighing the different amounts of evidence is a useful methodology. And just because there are gaps in knowledge doesn't necessarily mean that there is a problem there. So you readily admit that you are reliant on an argument from authority. I would push back that I'm using it. I do bring up consensus, but that's because these scientists are actually producing results. It's not an argument from popularity. It's an argument from results. So I don't need faith that successful science produces applicable knowledge. The fossil fuel industry uses consensus geology to find oil. Young Earth creationism doesn't produce technology. It doesn't produce novel discoveries. It doesn't produce predictions, but evolution and modern geology do produce that. You mentioned an almost universal belief of Christians in young Earth, but it was almost universally believed back then that the Earth was flat too. So again, you seem to be using the very fallacies that you take issue with me committing, but even admitting that maybe we're both using them, there's still evidence on my side. There doesn't seem to be evidence on your side. So the other part of that is the fact that so many scientists make the conclusion of old Earth is actually a theological problem, because that leads to a deceptive God or a weaker God that should know the conclusions that the most educated people are going to come to, people who are mostly in the Christian faith. And yet he sets up the world in a way that deceptively indicates a conclusion that you're saying God doesn't want us to come to. So that's a theological problem. The methodology here seems to be all just I actually didn't get the chance to ask the question, but it seems that you're kind of starting with your Bible is true and accurate and working from there versus actually coming to this conclusion with evidence. Nothing precludes the old Earth. We didn't hear any any evidence against the old Earth. Really, we heard some weak evidence for a young Earth. But the old Earth makes very few assumptions. All assumptions that we have are backed up with tons of evidence, such as the decay rate. It's the only rate we witness. Sure, something could have changed in the past, but we have no evidence of that. So, but we do have tons of preclusionary evidence, i.e. contradictions, not simply just gaps in knowledge. But it does seem like your basis for this is simply a prior commitment to the biblical story. I don't see a reason to accept that as my prior commitment. So, but according to all known evidence, we can preclude that assumption. So, in order for us to reject the scientific evidence, we would have to overturn a lot of physics with more scientific evidence. But which is why science is better, because it actually makes room for new information instead of saying this is a story, we're sticking with it no matter what the evidence says. Would like having that prior commitment to that story. So I don't know why I should accept that other than just an arbitrary belief that I'm just going to decide to accept the Bible and try and fit the evidence to that. That's letting belief dictate what the evidence is rather than letting the evidence dictate what our beliefs are. So if I would change my mind, it wouldn't be because of the evidence. It would just be an arbitrary switch of this fundamental belief. And yeah, a lot of the responses, if not all of them, to the preclusionary evidence that I gave shifted to some other topic. Like, for example, the resurrected corpses that were walking around Jerusalem. The response was talking about where the body of Jesus was with the evidence of ERVs. I understand you're not a biologist, but it is very damning evidence against young Earth creationism. It shouldn't be possible. Especially with the theological conclusion that God should put evidence for us.
20 seconds.
But with that, you shifted to irreducible complexity, used a lot of tu quoque fallacies. So we also didn't see any evidence that the Bible should be trusted as a historical document. So yeah, I think I gave a lot of evidence that would preclude young Earth creationism, and I didn't hear much in response.
Okay, that's roughly 5 minutes. Thank you for your concluding statement, Taylor. Thanks for the concluding statements to the both of you. Now, before we engage about 25 minutes worth of questions, David and Taylor, did you need a couple-minute break before we get into the questions, or would you like to get right into them?
You know, my interaction with Taylor has excited me so much. I see that we're at 2 hours and 15 minutes. For heaven's sakes, I can go all the way 45 more minutes, all the way up to a 3-hour thing.
Wow.
If Taylor is willing to answer the audience questions.
I was going to say it was an enjoyable debate. You are quite a lovely interlocutor. And yeah, it does not seem like it's been 2 hours. So let's keep going.
2 hours and 15 minutes has flown by. I appreciate how professional and respectful you've been to each other. So we're setting records tonight. We're going to try and hit that 3-hour mark. So drink lots of water, extra coffee. Let's have some fun. To the audience, if you have any on-topic questions, since we are going to have a thorough and extensive Q&A, tag me and we can have some fun. So maybe even some questions pertaining to topics that were brought up during the debate, but we may not have had all that much time to discuss. So with that, question number 1, we're just going to start at the beginning, and we've got a healthy mix of questions for the both of you, Snake and David. Good mix in the chat of creationists, evolutionists. David, one of your number one fans here, creationist crybabies, got the first question for you. So here we go. Let's have some fun. David, if you never read the Bible and just spent your life determining how old the world was, wouldn't you come up with a number in the billions using multiple dating methods?
crybaby, you better get ready to cry because I'm going to point out where you're wrong there. When I was an undergraduate student, I was privileged to work with Bob Gentry at Oak Ridge National Labs regarding his work on polonium halos. If I had come to that as a young geologist with no Bible knowledge, if I'd grown up the way that my father and my grandfather wanted me to, neither my father nor my grandfather McQueen were interested in the Bible. They were critics of the Bible. They would have never wanted me to even study the Bible. But if I had followed their path, and then as a young student had worked as a lab assistant for Robert Gentry, and helped him polish down halos found in fluorite and biotite, and helped him to edit as best I could as a young scientist. In 73, I helped him edit a paper called Ion Microprobe Conformation of Lead Isotope Ratios and the Search for Isomer Precursors in Polonium Radiohalos. I mean, this is nuclear physics being done at Oak Ridge National Labs, one of the premier laboratories around. If all I had known was Gentry's work, then I would be forced to question a billion-year-old Earth.
David, thank you for the response. Taylor, floor is yours. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Excuse me. Yeah, that was kind of my last point. It does seem like if not for the Bible, we wouldn't be coming up with young Earth arguments. You may be an outlier, Gentry, maybe too, but the majority of people are actually concluding opposite. So it seems like, and again, this is not an argument from popularity, it's an argument from why is the evidence such that it's so unclear that, assuming you're right, that all of these people are making a mistake and they're highly educated. And the fact is that not even a few hundred years ago, it was all young Earth creationism. And the evidence actually swayed people away from that. So it was all of these discoveries by young Earth creationists who were saying, look, this is not consistent with a young Earth. And so even though they had that Bible assumption, they still couldn't hold onto that. So the evidence, assuming you're correct about the conclusions, the evidence is not set up by the creator in a way that is easily understood by all of the best educated people on the planet. So it seems like the people who are holding out just because of the Bible, most of them.
May I respond to that, Donnie?
Yes. So whoever the question is for, we're going to make sure gets the last word. So David, question was for you. You get the last response.
The reason that Taylor's wrong on this is what I've gone up here. He's questioned the usefulness of a young Earth model. Now, most people in the 21st century value the usefulness of some job, medicine, engineering, because of the amount of money they can make in applying that profession. So my argument is that Taylor and Conspiracy Cat, a number of people I've debated, underestimate the number of young Earth creationists that are actually working at national labs, government facilities, whether it be the NASA or whatever. Why? Because these 30-year-old young Earth creationists, when they go into work, they know that they're going to lose their job. They know that they're not going to have enough money if they go around talking about creationism to buy a new car or to put their children through college. The second argument, and we can return to this later on, is that my own research on porphyrins in the chemistry of crude oil gives a number of predictive things, leads to predictions that might allow us to find additional crude oil. If we want to return to that, we can do that. Back to you, Donnie.
David, thank you for the final word. And to both of you, thanks for the responses. So we'll change it up now. We got a question for Snake from Taylor K. Thank you very much for your question, Taylor. So she's asking, salt is currently being added to the ocean at a rate of, there's the rate for you, per year. If the oceans are 3 billion years old, they would be much saltier at this rate. Question is, why are the oceans not as salty?
Yeah, so the rate of salt addition is variable, and so that can go up and down. The argument with things like limestone deposition is that is also variable, but there is an observed cap to it. So we haven't observed a rate that's fast enough for it to have been deposited in 6,000 years. So there's probably a cap for how much salt can be added to the ocean as well. But the fact that both of those rates are variable, the fact that the salt rate can go down would be perfectly consistent with reality. And so this current rate that we're observing is, again, not preclusionary in the sense that there isn't actually a contradiction. And if I could clarify one thing, I'm not going to try and fully respond to the last part, but I'm not saying money is the important thing. It's whether it works or not.
Thank you, Taylor.
Okay.
David, floor is yours.
Let me take a moment, Taylor, and correct a point that you've made there. You said that the evolutionary community believes the ocean is 3 billion years old. Well, that would put it in the Precambrian. And no 21st century geologist would say that the ocean floor is that old. In contrast, they put the age as Triassic, that there's no part of any ocean worldwide that has been cored and looked at that looks older than Triassic. Now, why would that be important in this argument about the amount of NaCl that is going into the ocean? It's important for this reason. The evolutionary community believes that any excess salt, any excess copper, any excess sodium is recycled in the subduction zones around the Earth, around the plates. The argument around, it's a point of fact that the amount of sodium, potassium, silver, gold, copper, lead, zinc that are found in the ocean floor or in suspension in the modern ocean water is far less than would be predicted by a ocean that's even as old as Triassic. And so the overall argument that you make in that question is actually a good one. And I would challenge Snake to explain how, or not how, why the amount of sodium, the amount of copper, lead, zinc doesn't match even a Triassic age for the ocean.
Mhm. So I'm not sure why you think that that would be predicted by the age of the Triassic, because that would be excluding a lot of other things that we know about. So that would be, so the assumption of consensus is not that the salt deposition rate, or not deposition, but um, salt accumulation rate would be the same. That wouldn't be a, a an assumption. And there's also built into a realistic model would have to, as you mentioned, be ways of taking salt out of the water. And both of those rates are variable. So the prediction that you mentioned would only be an unrealistic model of just a flat accumulation rate that is what's current. And yet, but in reality, we know that the rate is variable. And we also know that there is a variable rate of salt coming out of the water. And so one might be high right now and the other might be low at this point. But those can change, and we should assume those change because the conditions are much more complicated than just this one variable staying constant over time. So that would not, so I don't think that would be a realistic prediction that anyone would actually make.
Okay, Snake, thank you for the final word. Question was for you, so we'll move on to the next one. Now we got a question for David, comes in from Echoing Erudite. Question for David. Based on current erosion rates, shouldn't mountaintops have eroded flat, or at the very least, millions of years of fossils should have been washed out to the ocean? Go ahead, David.
Okay. My wife came in and asked me how much longer this is going to go because I got to do the dishes and mop the floor and stuff like that. But we'll just go for the 30 minutes that I promised here. And if I don't show up ever again, you know that my redheaded wife has finally done me in. But the answer to the question there, current erosion rates and about mountains, is a point very well taken. And we can illustrate it this way. If if we look at Mount Everest, and here's a tree to indicate that I'm drawing a cross section. So this is Mount Everest over there in that whole area of Nepal, and where the Indian subcontinent collided with China, that plate there, and pushed up Mount Everest, the tallest mountain on Earth. When we look at Mount Everest, we can find embedded in the rocks of Everest fossil material. And so the red dots will be fossil material. Now, many creationists incorrectly think that these fossils are somehow stuck on the side of Mount Everest like that. They're not at all. They're embedded in the rocks of Everest. Okay, now, if we take an old Earth and the age of these rocks, and let's just say for purposes of our argument, I'd have to look up what the evolutionary age of Everest is. But let's say that some of these rocks here are Cambrian or 600 million years old. They may not be, but let's just say they are. If you take the present as the key to the past, which I think is one of Taylor's assumptions, if you take that argument, then the amount of erosion in 600 million years should have reduced Everest to a plain feeding into the deltas of all those rivers in India that have the same deltas as I was talking about tonight, that for all that we know by objective science are 5,000 or 6,000 years old. Um, does that help answer the question?
Thank you, David, for the question. Let me get the question back up so Snake can see, because Snake, the floor is yours now. Go ahead.
Yeah, so there does seem to be a problem with the unrealistically high rates of lots of things happening in the flood story, such as evolution, speciation rate, fossilization rate, decay, radioactive decay rate, tectonic activity, ice accumulation, season cycling, lithification, limestone deposition, and this isn't even the half of what we're seeing. It is all of this would have had to occur at rates that are not observed. So when you say that the present is the key to the past, well, yes, it is, but at least the best available key to the past. So that's the best available information that we have. Things that we observe in the present, we know that it's at least capable of doing this. So with all these extremely accelerated rates that have to have occurred in the flood story, these are rates that have never been observed and are in many cases just not physically possible. And so, yes, the observed rates are a much better key to the past, because that's what can be confirmed. We can't confirm these highly exaggerated rates beyond anything that's ever been observed, and in fact, which are observed to not be possible. So there may be flaws. There certainly are things that we haven't observed yet, or that we might never observe, that would be possible in the past. But we shouldn't be making assumptions about things that we haven't been able to test.
Thank you, Taylor, for the response. David, this time around, it's your question. You get the last word. Go ahead.
This would be my challenge to why what Taylor says is not true. Let's take one of his critiques, the idea of the amount of limestone in the fossil record. I have argued over the last year that the evolutionary community is ignoring the chemistry around limestone. Recall that limestone is really a very simple compound. It's calcium carbonate, CaCO3. So if we focus on CO2 in the atmosphere, and we look at the variables that we know is present in the modern ocean, and certainly would have been present in the ocean of the flood year, you've got variations in pH. EH is a measure of electrical conductivity and availability to the ions. Temperature affects this, pressure of CO2. So you can get the direct precipitation of limestone from even the modern ocean. Taylor, you and Donnie and I should really travel to the Bahamas, to Andros Island, because my professors went there. It's a good reason to get off on spring break. Oh, we're going to study the limestones in the Bahamas. So it turns out if you go to Andros Island, the three of us can walk out in a type of limestone mud that is called micrite, and we can see limestone being formed today. And so there's no question that it could be rapidly formed in the past.
David, thank you for the final word. Appreciate the question, echoing erudite. Next question, we'll get one now for Snake Was Right. This comes in from George Bond. George Bond, good to see you. David, I think you know who George is.
Yes, he's my friend from down under.
There we go. So, George, question for Taylor. Question is, secular geology says coal forms in swamps, but Orakia Araucaria, could anyone pronounce that right? Pine does not grow in swamps. Neither does silky oak, and many more found in Australian coal. Many are polystrata, ?
Yeah, so I'm very certain there are no quote unquote polystrate trees. None of them go through different geologic ages. They do go through different conditions, which are easily produced quickly in local floods. So the other thing is, yeah, and not through coal. So there they are near coal and things like that. The other thing is that conditions change. You can have a swamp somewhere and then it dries up, or it used to be a desert and then it started raining there. And that's just basic climate change, and it can occur without human intervention as well.
Thank you. And also thank you to Lorraine. She says, I say Asia. Okay, so David, floor is yours for your response.
I very much thank George for bringing in a perspective from Australia. Again, 2 years from now, Ms. McQueen and I hope to travel to Australia and be around George and John Mackay and others there to see some of these examples. Let me give you an example snake that I've seen with my own eyes. If you and I were to drive to Nashville, Tennessee, in that area, the Nashville Basin, I could take you to a place where actually along the road, as I recall, it's even near an interstate, but at least there's some road that you and I could stand beside. And I can show you an honest to goodness polystrate tree that goes through 10 meters worth of sediment, some of which are coals, as it turns out. Snake's comment is correct in part. In other words, this whole section is considered either Mississippian, Pennsylvanian, or Permian. And so he's correct to say that this is a block of geologic time, but his rescue device of saying that there are no demonstrative, reproducible polystrate trees is simply incorrect, whether you're talking about Australia or Nashville, Tennessee.
Thank you very much, David. Let me get the question back up. And it was a question for you, Taylor, so you get the last word. Go ahead, take your time.
Yeah, I'd be curious to study that specimen. Quick Google search reveals nothing, so I would need like the name of it or something, or some kind of study going on that. But yeah, I would like more information on that. But based on my research, it doesn't go through huge geologic ages. I did mention conditions changing from dry to wet. The other thing I'll also mention is we have petrified standing tree fossils today that are sticking up out of the earth. Some are partially buried. So you could have conditions where the trees are petrified, and then you could have tons of geologic stuff happening on top of that, burying them, unburying them, anything. So that would be one explanation for why trees would appear to have been alive for longer than perhaps they appear, or it should be.
Thank you, Taylor. Cute question from Lorraine Drosophila. $2 super chat. Thank you. Is your redhead blue-eyed, David?
As a biologist, Taylor will be interested in my classification of redheads. There are speckled reds that have a lot of freckles. That's not my wife. There is the Star Trek The Next Generation Dr. Beverly Crusher. Is that her name? in Star Trek. Am I remembering that right? The Next Generation. She's a blue-eyed redhead, so that's that species. My wife, her classification of redheads is that she's called an ivory red. In other words, she has beautiful skin, no freckles. The red hair will descend on me if we don't stop in 20 minutes, but that's okay.
All right.
I would push back a little in if you had any insinuation that the freckles were not equally beautiful skin, because I do like both. But yeah, I myself, my beard can be red at times, so I'm not sure where I fit into that classification.
Very good,
Maybe
guys.
maybe you'll have to add a new branch to that one.
New
Well,
brand.
I focus on the female redheads, not
Yeah.
red men with red hair are called red-haired men. The word redhead is never used masculine. Go ahead.
Or ginger.
Correct. Yes,
That's what the
correct.
kids are calling it, you know.
That's,
Yeah,
what, that's what the kids are calling it. All right, guys, cool.
21st
Keeping it.
century.
All right, keeping it lighthearted. So here we go. Another question. Another one for you, Taylor. Alec Cox, $10 super chat. Appreciate it. So Alec is asking, if we came from primates, why can't we just mix a few DNA back to primate? Therefore, we are a totally different code than primates, and the two are separate and never were related. Taylor, how do you feel about that?
Well, that's kind of a I don't know what to call it. I'm not sure if it's quite a fallacy or what, but the fact is that you can have a common ancestor with something that you can't mate with. So a great example that I always use is foxes. So there are like dozens of species of foxes, and almost all of them have different numbers of chromosomes and cannot interbreed. And while most creationists would actually accept that foxes are actually a subset of canines, so they're in a even larger order than just foxes, that they're related to wolves and dogs and perhaps other canines as well. I think we can safely agree and assume that the fox archetype, at least most, if not all foxes, are related to each other, even going from a biblical worldview point. But they all have different numbers of chromosomes, and they can't interbreed with each other, and they can't interbreed with other canines. I think maybe there might be some coyote foxes, but they can't. There's no confirmed interbreeding with wolves and foxes or dogs and foxes, and most foxes can't interbreed with each other either. So it's an observed phenomenon that animals can have variations in chromosomes and still be interfertile and still perpetuate their species, but they have these genetic anomalies that happen that lead to eventually down the line not being able to mate with their own ancestral or sister kinds, so to speak. So that's the reason we can't mix DNA with primates. I don't know if the question is asking mix a few DNA back to primate is talking about actually breeding with them. That would not be possible because of the chromosomal structure. But again, that's not preclusionary to the theory that we're related, because we know that it's possible for related animals to come to a point where they have different incompatible chromosomes.
Thank you, Taylor. Also, Alec, thank you for the question. And David, the floor is yours for if you had a response.
Alec, let me get Donnie to give me my screen, full screen, and I'll present a counter argument to what we're talking about here. For 40 years of my professional life as a young earth creationist, I have heard repeatedly this human chimp comparison when it comes to DNA sequences and so forth. As Taylor has correctly pointed out, I'm professionally trained as a geologist, but that doesn't mean that I can't think. And it also doesn't mean that I haven't actually taught biology at the college and high school level. And so I do know something about DNA sequencing. And so the evolutionary scientists that I've argued with over the years, oh, McQueen, you idiot, don't you know that if you look at the genome sequence of DNA in a chimpanzee and a human, uh, that there's great similarity. And um, over the years, Donnie can give us more information on this, but over the years, there's been a variety of numbers. Oh, it's 50% like humans or 70% like humans. Well, the argument that's been made, really going back to the day of Dwayne Gish and Henry Morris in the 1970s, was that so what if uh, a chimp is supposed to have 2 legs and 2 arms, and a human is supposed to have 2 legs and 2 arms? There's no surprise that there would be similar DNA. In other words, using the engineering example, um, going back to Paley's argument about watches being found on seashores, if we look at 2 different watches, here's a clock, and then here is a wristwatch, there are similarities. There's a second hand and a hour hand and minute hand, but that doesn't mean that the pocket watch evolved into the clock. Thank you, Donnie.
Okay, thank you, David. Taylor, question was for you. You get the last word.
Yeah. So just to strengthen the argument a little, that we are related to other primates. Well, it's interesting that creationists will readily accept that we can detect Neanderthal DNA in human DNA. And so it's not an argument that the creator simply made humans and Neanderthals separately, but with common DNA parts. But they actually accept, no, we can actually detect that this has a common lineage with Neanderthals. They don't carry over the same argument with other primates for some reason. But it's not possible that we're not related to the other primates, especially having a common ancestor with chimps. Not that we evolved from chimps, but both of us evolved from the same common ancestor. It's not possible that that didn't happen because there are DNA sequences that are exogenous or introduced by infections. And we have the same ones in the same places on the same chromosomes and the same genes, and we have hundreds of them. And so this is mathematically impossible. If this was introduced as exogenously, they're called endogenous because they have moved from exogenous to endogenous. That's the ERVs. You could even take away the assumption that they got there from infections and that they instead got there because they are transposable elements, that they instead got there via just transposition. Again, impossible for them to have landed in the same spots just by chance. So again, mixed with the fact that we can't mate with them is not preclusionary, because we know that common ancestors can have these chromosomal anomalies that lead to chromosomal differences not being able to mate. Chromosomal incompatibility. That was the word I was looking for. That mixed with that, there's really no reason to deny this relationship.
Okay, Taylor, thank you very much. We'll start winding it down now with 1 or 2 more questions. The Q&A, just like the debate itself, really is flying by. And so, as always with these Q&As, we could do them until the same time tomorrow. So I do apologize to anybody in the chat if we don't get to your question. There are quite a few questions that have come in. Okay, so next question for David, another one from Creationist Crybaby. David, weren't the Himalayas formed by two tectonic plates, Indian and Eurasian plates, colliding over millions of years? If not, how did they form so rapidly?
Okay, Crybaby. I appreciate you looking up the exact names here. And so we'll do this is a map view. So this is north. And we're going to look at the Indian Ocean in, let's say, the last month of the Great Flood, or in the time right after the flood, that I have come to call the post-flood residual catastrophe time. But one way or the other, here you've got the plate, as you correctly call the Eurasian plate, and then the Indian plate is moving up this way. And this is an area of subduction here. So I'll do SZ for subduction zone. And so the Indian plate did collide in a catastrophic plate tectonics model rapidly with the Eurasian plate. And that collision created the mountain range that includes Everest. And so, Crybaby, the issue is not, was there a collision? There was a collision. 21st century creationists acknowledge it's a collision. But the issue is, did it happen rapidly or slowly? Many of you that are new to Standing for Truth may not know the name Baumgartner. And if you go back and Google this name, you'll find that he has done a tremendous amount of work modeling catastrophic plate tectonics. As we've pointed out earlier in the debate, I think there is let me get another color here. I think there is a reasonable argument for heat dissipation around catastrophic plate tectonics, which would explain how this could have happened in a matter of hundreds of years rather than millions. Snake?
Yeah, I think the main problem with that, again, would be the heat problem. And Baumgartner himself reports the numbers on just how much heat would be produced by the friction of this, as well as the fact that, going back to the thing like the present is the key to the past, we have observed continents moving slowly. We have not observed continents moving extremely fast. Now, is it possible that continents moved really fast in the past or moved faster in the past? Sure. We don't have evidence of that. We only observe what we can see today. But there is preclusionary evidence to them moving that fast, because if they moved that fast, then it would have melted the earth, which is, again, going back to the heat problem. So like, that's contradictory evidence, not just a gap in knowledge.
Appreciated, Taylor. David, you get the last word. Question was for you. Go ahead.
And then I'd like to take one more question. Again, if I don't see you again, Taylor, it's because of my wife murdering me in my sleep, but got to go in 5 minutes here. But let me do a quick.
I'm in the same boat.
You're in the same boat.
Right about now.
But the answer to your question is a detail that you don't apparently know. If this is the east coast of North America, and here is Greenland, here Nova Scotia, here Ireland here, and England here. A man working at NASA Goddard in Greenbelt, Maryland, that I interacted with in around 1980. This fellow named Lohman took a close look at how the idea of continental separation is shown by laser imaging. And so he looked at, you've got to do this in pieces. A laser image there, Greenland. I left out Iceland. In Iceland, you can actually go across the mid-Atlantic ridge, and see that in some detail. And then here is Ireland, and then England here. If you look at the measurements, the actual laser measurements in the modern context, and this is data that was gathered in the 70s, I guess, the standard deviation of error. So the standard deviation of error in these methods is within the 5 centimeter claim of the evolutionary community of separation across the mid-Atlantic ridge. And so this guy Lohman came up and said, well, there's no evidence of modern separation, but there's plenty of evidence of separation in the past. What do you make of that, Taylor?
Actually, I think that was David. That was your question. So let's give you the last word. Let's get one final question in.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Oh, no, that's okay. It's been great. It does not feel like 3 hours. So great job to the both of you. Great endurance. So we'll wrap it up with one last question.
Thank you.
And David, if this is the last time we hear from you or see you, at least this was an epic debate. So we'll remember you in a good light. You and Taylor both make
You're a kind debate. Man, Donnie. You're a kind man.
You too, Taylor, because you said you're in the same boat. So this might be the last time we see the both of you. Okay, Taylor K. Final question for tonight. Question for Snake. Is there any evidence that the magnetic fields have ever reversed?
Yeah, I haven't looked too much into this as much as a lot of the other stuff, especially because my focus is biology. But as far as I understand it, there's like iron dust that is present in the solid rock strata that you can go through the layers and see that they are turning, and they do this multiple times. And so that would be pretty good evidence since the iron is sensitive to the magnetic fields.
Thank you, Taylor. David, go ahead.
Give me full screen on this and I'll comment about that. Here is an argument that many of you have heard me use before about the decay of the Earth's magnetic field. Now, this precludes the dynamo theory. This is the idea that God charged the magnetic field of the Earth, and by the right-hand rule, you can see the generation of a magnetic field. If this is an equatorial magnetic field, it generates equatorial electrical current generates a magnetic field perpendicular to it. If you look at this argument in some detail, we now can take the work that Tom Barnes did all the way back to 1835 and bring it up to 2005. And we can see that the magnetic moment measured in amp per meter squared times 10 to the 22nd has decreased with time, with a half-life of 1,400 years. If the magnetic field was 32 times as strong as it is today, that would give an age of the Earth of 7,000 years. And this is by the right-hand rule. Now, where would magnetic striping come in that? Russ Humphreys and others have suggested that during the time of the Great Flood, because of all this catastrophic plate tectonics, the amount of heat generated and moving through the crust and the mantle, that there were reversals of the Earth's magnetic field during that time. And that's the way I would explain it.
David, thank you very much. Taylor, you get the last word. Question was for you.
Oh, sure. So yeah, the age of one cycle, well, I guess the age of one reversal, I would say doesn't really limit us to the age of that one cycle, so, or one reversal. Because, and I keep slipping with the word cycle because it seems like it has gone through this reversal multiple times, so it is actually cycling. The evidence of the iron in the rock strata. And again, I don't try to appeal to authority or to consensus, but so there are geologists who say what you say, David, and then there are geologists who have different theories. And myself as a non-geologist, I'm not sure why I would pick the minority consensus, or I mean, I'm not. I guess I wouldn't know what to say, so I would have to go with probably the majority consensus. But as far as I've studied up on this, it seems like there is a cycling of reversals, that this happened multiple times. And as far as dynamo theory, I guess it's gonna have to be another rabbit hole I'm gonna have
Yeah,
to go
right.
learn about.
Well, Taylor, I very much enjoyed this, and contact Donnie, and in a couple of months we'll have to do it again. Uh, you two can help me with something. What does it mean when a redhead is coming with a baseball bat? Oh, I have to get off now. A little bit of humor there. As George would
David,
say, I am gone.
enjoy the
Well,
dishes.
goodbye.
And okay, well, there we go. Let's wrap it up. We hit it's been a 3+ hour debate. So everybody, this is a comprehensive debate on young earth creation. Young earth creation is on trial. So David, who has now left us, hopefully we'll see him again in the future. And I want to thank David and Taylor, obviously, for doing this. Tons of fun for the audience question. We went about 50 minutes for that audience Q&A. So to anyone's question who we did not get to, I apologize. But again, I think this was a debate to remember. I had a lot of fun. Taylor, hope you did as well. Taylor, did you want some final words, final thoughts?
Huh? No, that was fun. Thanks for having us.
Okay, my pleasure. Doki Doki Bible Club. So last thing I'll say, you want to see more from our debaters. Snake was right. Here's his 2 debate channels, or channels in general. Snake was right and Debate Cafe. If you want to see more from David McQueen, you'll see more from him here on our
Yeah,
channel, Standing for Truth.
and I'll add, I think we have a bit of a need for some of the Christian and young earth debaters, so that we don't cycle through the same ones a lot. So if any of you are interested, there have been young earth creationists who won the debates on the channel, so don't be afraid.
Well, there we go. I'll slip you a 20 before the debate that I do on your channel, and you
That's
can give
how
me
it
the
works. That's how yeah.
bribing, right?
Yeah.
You heard it here, folks. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, let's do it. We'll get some more young earth creationists on your debate channel, Debate Cafe. So Snake, thank you. David, thank you.